Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we are continuing our ongoing coverage of the war between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. And today, we want to look specifically at the Battle of Robotyne. Obviously, this is making some headlines. The Ukrainians have created this salient in the south, just south of this locale, Orikhiv, and the Ukrainians have claimed to have penetrated the main Russian line of defense just to the south of Robotyne, which is located right here. The area in which the Ukrainians are claiming to have penetrated the main Russian lines is just to the south-southeast of Robotyne in this area here. Now, this map is not saying that. This map is still saying the Russians control their main lines of defense, and the fighting continues in this salient. So we want to look at the units that are involved in this ongoing conflict. We've received reports that the Russians are redeploying the 76th Air Assault Division, Guards Air Assault Division, within the vicinity of Robotyne. That is considered more or less a more elite fighting unit, comparable to the U.S. 82nd or 101st Airborne Division. Now, it is a bit strange given the terrain in this area. It is open fields with fairly sparse vegetation that sits in between these open fields. You would think that this would be a focal point for mechanized and armor operations, but given technology, given the ability for both sides to sense and shoot, obviously the Russians feel the need to deploy these elite light infantry supported directly by tanks and armored infantry fighting vehicles. The Ukrainians have deployed a multitude of brigades in this salient. If you look, and we're going to look specifically just in this area here, very, very close to Robotyne. And if we start at the very front line, you have the Skala Assault Battalion, the 78th Regiment Air Assault Forces, the 47th Mechanized Brigade. We understand that unit has taken massive casualties. Massive casualties. The 116th Mechanized Brigade, the 14th Operational Brigade of the Ukrainian National Guard, and then finally, the 33rd Mechanized Brigade, holding down kind of this the Ukrainian left flank as these units continue to try and battle Russian forces. Now, Russian forces involved in this operation, we're going to go back to the deep state map, and this gives you a better idea of the Russian forces involved in this operation. We'll start from the west, so it would be the Russian left flank, the 503rd Motorized Rifle Regiment, elements of the Russian National Guard, the 810th Naval Infantry Brigade, the 291st Guards Motorized Rifle Regiment, another Motorized Rifle Regiment, the 70th Motorized Rifle Regiment, the 210th Motorized Rifle Regiment, the 14th Reserve Unit. These BARS units I'm just going to designate as reserves because these are mobilized forces. 201st Motorized Rifle Regiment, 71st Guards Motorized Rifle Regiment, 1st Reserve Unit, 3rd Reserve Unit, 11th Reserve Unit, the 100th Separate Reconnaissance Battalion, the 417th Separate Reconnaissance Battalion, the 56th Air Assault Regiment, the 108th Airborne Assault Regiment, and the 22nd Separate Special Purpose Brigade. It's interesting that the Russians are putting their most elite units on this right flank, and they're using their artillery, their airstrikes, their glide bombs, multiple launch rocket systems to then engage these Ukrainian brigades that are now in this salient. So essentially, you could have as many as 5, 10, 15, maybe 10,000, given some of these are under strength units ranging from 2 to 5,000 personnel brigades. I'm guessing that there's about 10,000 Ukrainian troops allocated to this salient. And then you can see the Russian composition in terms of what they are putting around this salient is going to exceed the troop numbers of what the Ukrainians have deployed. And remember, the Russians also have an air force as well. I get what the Ukrainians are trying to do, but at the same time, I'm not sure this is a wise nor prudent decision, especially in terms of how this is eventually going to end for the Ukrainians. They specifically are looking to threaten Tokmak. At a certain point, they're going to need to open up another area of operations, create another salient, create another drive. Where that's going to be is going to be over here to the west. What's interesting is the deep state map is reporting in this area. If you look at these units, these Russian units that deep state is reporting, that's a Novorossiya unit. And this right here, 45th Guard Spetsnaz Brigade deployed in this area. And that's one of the best premier combat units in the Russian Federation. Outside of some of its KSO forces and special operations forces and Tier 1 forces, this is a highly regarded unit, the 45th Guard Spetsnaz Brigade. And then the 429th Motorized Rifle Brigade. And then in that area, you can see that the Ukrainians have the 128th Mountain Assault Brigade. They got a recon unit. And then backing those up, they've got additional forces, the 65th Mechanized Brigade, the 117th Mechanized Brigade, the 15th Operational Brigade of the National Guard, the 23rd Public Protection Brigade, 65th Brigade, 73rd Naval Center for Special Operations, naval infantry unit of the Ukrainians, and Ukrainian Legion unit there. But again, the main area for Ukrainian offensive operations is in this area near Robotyne. And again, you have to ask yourself, what next? If the Ukrainians continue to push south and elongate this salient, as they're going to have to widen the salient if it's to be successful. And again, they haven't even penetrated the main Russian defensive line, and you have secondary lines as well. And then finally, Tokmak. So difficult situation for the Ukrainians. Again, very strange strategy. I don't get it. But I think there are other hands that are playing into this conflict. I believe there are political entities both in the West and in Kiev that are part of this obvious decision-making process, and it's not completely up to the military commanders. I'm not so sure if the Ukrainians, the Ukrainian military, would continue high-tempo military operations in this southern sector, given what's happened. Here near Staromayorsky and Yurzhine, this area has basically been stifled. The Russians have caused a tremendous amount of casualties of Ukrainian forces in this area. And there's even more Ukrainian units that were committed to this area. You have the 37th Brigade Marines, 38th Brigade Marines, 4th Tank Brigade, 68th Yager Regiment, 25th Airborne Brigade, element of 3rd Regiment Special Purpose Forces, 35th Marine Brigade, 129th Territorial Brigade, 31st Mechanized Brigade. And then confronting those Ukrainian forces just to the south of Staromayorsky and Yurzhine are the following. And the Russians have focused on stopping any continued offensive operations by the Ukrainians. They've moved a lot of units into this area. You've got the 60th Separate Motorized Rifle Brigade, the 11th Separate Motorized Rifle Brigade, the 247th Guards Air Assault Regiment, 136th Motorized Rifle Brigade, 218th Tank Regiment, 114th Motorized Rifle Regiment, 125th Separate Motorized Rifle Brigade, 37th Separate Motorized Rifle Brigade, 34th Separate Motorized Rifle Brigade, and a Novorossiya unit on that right flank, 394th Motorized Rifle Regiment, and Storm Z units. And then just out of curiosity, let's go back up north and look at the force composition of what the Russians have built up near Kupiansk. I've talked about this before. We are going to see an offensive operation in this area. When it's going to happen, it is happening, although the Russians haven't gone all in yet. So in this area, Storm Z unit, Motorized Rifle Battalion reported by this site, 25th Separate Guards Motorized Rifle Brigade, 347th Motorized Rifle Brigade, 2nd Motorized Rifle Division from the 1st Tank Guards Army, 138th Separate Motorized Rifle Brigade, 26th Tank Regiment of the 47th Tank Division 1st Guards Army, 7th Motorized Rifle Division from the 18th Division Reserve Unit, 27th Separate Guards Motorized Rifle Brigade, 15th Separate Motorized Rifle Brigade, 21st Separate Motorized Rifle Brigade, 30th SEP Motorized Rifle Brigade, 3rd Motor Rifle Division, 234th Airborne Assault Regiment, 71st Guards Motorized Rifle Brigade, 55th Mountain Motorized Rifle Brigade, 331st Airborne Regiment from the 98th Airborne Division. So, again, needless to say, quite a force construct the Russians have built up in this area. And again, an additional focus by the Russians to prevent this breakout near Robotyne. So the fighting is continuing, and we'll continue to cover and bring you information as soon as we get it. Thank you for joining us today. More to come. Have a good day.